Wetlands are critical to wildlife. At one time or another in their lives, most of the world's wildlife will use wetlands. And for many animals, these wetlands are the key to their survival. So what is a wetland? It could be a marsh, a slough, a swamp, a bog, or even the area along a riverbank called the riparian zone. All of these have three parts that together classify an area as a wetland. The main element is water. This drives the other two, a special kind of soil, and the water-loving plants that flourish in this earth. These plants are called hydrophytes. Hydro means water, and phytes is a word for plants. The water doesn't have to be there all the time for an area to be a wetland, but it must be there long enough to produce those special plants and soils. Hydrophytes are plants that have adapted to wet conditions. Unlike other plants, these don't suffocate and rot in water-soaked soil. A good example of this kind of plant is a cattail. And down near the roots of these plants, you'll find a special kind of mud called hydric soil. Rich and black, it's composed of organic material, plants that have died and build up without breaking down like they do in drier soils.
It's very dark.
So these three elements, water, hydric soils, and hydrophytes, make up a wetland. And we're just beginning to become aware of their value. For most of our nation's history, wetlands were viewed as wastelands. For years, with the government's help, America steadily did away with these precious resources until less than half of the country's original wetlands remain. Now we realize the incredible value of these places, but it's still a difficult task to preserve them. So why are wetlands so essential? Well, they're extremely important to wildlife. Birds like great blue herons, ducks, and geese would not exist without wetlands. They are also critical summer breeding areas for ducks and geese. And here in Idaho, the world's largest nesting concentration of greater sandhill cranes build their nests among the bulrushes and cattails of Gray's Lake. Wetlands also serve as important stopover points for migrating waterfowl. Each spring, Mud Lake becomes a temporary resting place for thousands of snow geese as they journey to nesting grounds further north. And every spring, about 5,000 white-fronted geese descend on the Fort Boise area. Their migration route stretches from their winter home in Mexico to the nesting grounds of Alaska. This is the last stop for the white-fronted geese before the final leg of their journey. After this rest, they will fly non-stop 2,000 miles. It is a critical wetland indeed. Wetlands are important to other animals too. Some of the less obvious wetlands are places like this, the thin green lines that wind through the high deserts of Idaho. It's a narrow strip of relatively lush vegetation surrounded by a more arid upland. Areas like this, along the banks of a stream, seem to flourish with plant life. Cottonwoods, willows, and shrubs hug the river, drawing their existence from its waters. These thin green lines are the lifeblood of Idaho's desert wildlife. Fish, insects, frogs, songbirds, and other species depend on these critical wetlands to survive. In the winter, these areas also provide protection or cover for upland game birds such as sharp-tailed grouse and ringneck pheasants. And fish depend on wetlands. The plants along the stream bank provide food and shelter for fish. Overhanging branches shade the water, keeping it cool. And they also serve as cover, hiding the fish from predators. And the insects that live in these streamside plants provide a steady food supply for the fish. Up in the Palouse country, wetlands also play a critical role. This is a different terrain than Idaho's high deserts. The Palouse Prairie has a long agricultural history. Its rich soil drew early settlers, and subsequently, for several generations, the gently sloping hills have been plowed and planted, obscuring the original landscape. So what did this country really look like before the land was blanketed in waving wheat? Rose Creek Preserve is a rare remnant of what the Palouse country may have looked like before white settlers. Ecologically fragile, this small area has been set aside by the Nature Conservancy and is preserved as a national natural landmark. Scientists speculate that at one time all the Palouse appeared like this protected spot, rolling uplands carpeted with native prairie plants, bunchgrass, camas, and yellow balsam. And down below, tucked in the narrow valleys, were the wetlands, thick with aspen and hawthorn. These places are sanctuaries for wildlife. They use the dense cover to hide from predators, and the trees and brush provide food for birds, deer, and other animals. Nowadays, much of the Palouse is agricultural land. Wheat fields stretch for miles over softly rolling hills. In the valleys between, water collects, forming small streams. Of course, the key to making a farm profitable is efficient use of the land. For years, the farmers of the Palouse country plowed their fields right up to the edge of stream banks. This allowed no room for riparian habitat, the critical native vegetation that flourishes along a creek. This special plant life filters runoff water from cultivated fields. When it's removed, sediments, nutrients, and herbicides go directly into the streams. Now, some farmers are creating 300-foot buffer strips along creek banks. Here, they plant native grasses, trees, and shrubs that capture and hold sediment and improve water quality. This also aids in preventing erosion. It's a bid to hold on to their agricultural legacy rather than sending it downriver. The added benefit is that it's good for wildlife, providing food, water, and shelter. Straightening drainages to make them more efficient can be another legacy in economical farming methods, but these are not natural and tend to erode quickly. Here, the stream was constantly overflowing its banks and flooding the road. This landowner, with financial help from the county, has relocated the creek. Then he reconstructed meanders in the stream and created a natural floodplain. The blue plastic cones protect the new plantings that will lock in sediment with their roots and someday shade the stream. Just south of the Palouse is a place called the Camas Prairie, named for the bright blue flower that blankets this area. Camas is a wetland plant, a hydrophyte. These are important plants to Native Americans. Long before the white settlers came, the Nez Perce harvested the nutritious roots of the plant and used them for food. And today, the camas still has a strong ceremonial importance to these Native Americans. This blue bloom has also lent its name to another wetland in south-central Idaho. This Camas Prairie furnishes food and shelter to an amazing variety of shorebirds and waterfowl, all animals that are specifically adapted to living in wetlands. Here, a phalarope skims along, a small shorebird that seems constantly in motion, rapidly dabbing its bill as it feeds. Stepping gracefully through the higher grasses is a willet, a rather nondescript gray-brown bird that's a cousin to the brighter phalarope. The low, steady hum of the marsh is interrupted by a sandhill crane, singing out a warning with her peculiar call. This is her secret: 2 large eggs perched on a flat platform of a nest made of dried grasses. She, in turn, invades the territory of a blackbird, which becomes excited and begins to harass the larger bird in an almost comical show of aggression that seems to have little effect on the plodding pace of the sandhill. A pair of striking black, white, and tan-patterned birds searches the shallows, feeding on aquatic insects, seeds, and small crustaceans. The American avocet is easily recognized by its slender, upturned bill and distinctive plumage. Although the benefits for wildlife are easy to see, wetlands have a far more subtle role. Wetlands are really important for flood control. They work like giant sponges, absorbing water during floods and storms. Instead of water rushing downstream, the wetland slowly soaks the water into the ground, replenishing underground aquifers. Wetlands can also improve water quality. These school children are planting marsh grasses in an eroded area near Hagerman above a place called Thousand Springs. They're helping to build a 30-acre wetland to filter the pollutants out of this irrigation water before it drops back into the Snake River. When water enters a wetland, it slows down. The plants and their roots trap the dirt. These plants also act as filters, absorbing nutrients such as fertilizers from farmlands and body waste from animals and humans. As you can see, wetlands serve a critical function in cleaning our water. These areas are wonderful places to visit. Many come to wetlands to watch or photograph birds. It's incredible how many different species use these areas. A quiet approach yields the best chance of seeing and photographing wildlife. Guiding a canoe or kayak through a wetland almost guarantees an opportunity to see wildlife. What better way to view them than gliding silently by? Anglers come to wetlands to fish and to enjoy the variety of opportunities these areas offer. Some folks like the excitement and challenge of bass fishing, where part of the fun is trying to outfish your partner. Others prefer quietly fly casting for rainbows, standing among the reeds and cattails, right in the river with the fish. And as fall begins and the reeds turn a golden brown, duck hunters arrive in the quiet before dawn to set out their decoys. The waterfowl migration is in full swing, and in the early morning light, the first ducks begin to fly. Down below in the cattails, the sportsmen beckon them with their duck calls. True conservationists, waterfowl hunters are important contributors to wetland restoration, funding critical programs to protect this precious resource. Our wetlands have been a long neglected part of the puzzle that nurtures our world. Now, we realize that they are helpful in containing floods, essential for clean water, and a vital refuge for wildlife. And in many ways, a refuge for man.